So I've discussed it, I've calmed down, and I've given it a lot of thought, and I believe that I've finally found an appropriate way to handle the matter. I've decided to re-upload the video, set it to unlisted, and to provide a new introduction. However, the entirety of the unedited original will follow. First, in spite of the accusations on the forums, neither CCP nor the CSM censored the video. It was only on YouTube, and I decided to take it down. I was not threatened nor bribed. As for the video, it was an emotional response caused by my concern over the direction of Eve. After I had posted it, I realized that it was made in anger and fear, based entirely off of suspicions, negatively impacting community morale, and not the type of content that I want to make as a creator. And so I took it down. That being said, I don't think it's fair to not warn new and existing players of exploitative monetization methods. However, that's where things start getting complicated, because I only suspect them of doing shady shit. I do not actually know. So, that is why I decided to handle it the way that I am. The video will stay up, unlisted, and this will be my final decision. Unless I see irrefutable evidence one way or the other, this is where I'll leave it. Of course, I can't say that this is the correct path to take, but at least I can say I've arrived at my decision through careful deliberation this time. Moreover, I believe that this solution is fair to my fans, my detractors, and the community as a whole, and consistent with the type of content creator that I want to be. I am not trying to be a negative YouTuber that drums up outrage for views. I want to make fun and informative content. I want to share with people the things I like and for them to like it too. I wish I could get more views doing it, but I'm not going to corrupt my channel in order to do so. I may be wrong, and you may disagree with my decision, but hopefully you can agree with my motives. And if not, I do not care, because I'm not trying to please the people who just want to see the world burn. I'm too busy trying to be the best possible version of myself. I have now recorded 4 different intros to this video, flip-flopped on my position, and have oscillated back and forth over whether or not to release this. I have gone from bummed out to relaxed to agitated and back again. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here. At this point, I have to release the video because I need to get it off my chest. Of course, I'm about to get into it in detail, but I suspect that CCP is trying to sneakily design mechanics that drive up the in-game prices of pilot service items in order to incentivize cash purchases of them. I don't know if they have plans to take this as far as Pearl Abyss has done with BDO, but it does appear like they are taking it farther and farther, and compromising the best possible version of Eve in order to increase its profitability. I'm not trying to bum people out, start riots, get views, sabotage Eve, or anything like that. Right now, all I want is 2 things: to get this off my chest, and the best possible version of Eve. I hope that sometime within the next year, I look back on this video and get embarrassed at how wrong I was, that I cringe as I set the video from public to private and pray that people forget about it. It wouldn't be a pleasant experience, but it's still far preferable to the alternative. But I better get a move on before I start losing people. So, real quick, I've never worked in or went to school for business, economics, or game development. I'm just a random asshole with a microphone and a little spare time. So, there's a pretty good chance that I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. Alright, here's my video. CCP already has a pay-for-convenience monetization method in EVE Online. After all, players can buy Plex, MPTCs, and skill extractors with real-world money and then use them in-game or sell them for S through the in-game market. Purists out there would call this pay-to-win, but at the end of the day, player skill is still the biggest determining factor in fight outcomes. Yes, players can convert cash into ships and or skill points, but it's a moot point when player skill trumps all. Besides, that and the full loot death mechanic means that players who try to compensate for a lack of skill with cash just end up enriching their killers. But I digress. So, we already have pay for convenience in EVE. So what? It doesn't ruin the core experience of the game, and the vast majority of players are fine with it. Well, the problem is that devs and publishers can alter their mechanics in order to increase grind and frustration, which in turn can incentivize players to make microtransactions. Right now, things are pretty good in EVE, but if we look to the US release of Black Desert Online, we can see pay for convenience taken to a frustrating and destructive extreme. There, the same monetization method has resulted in a player mass exodus, and it's left its fans frustrated and demoralized at having to watch their MMO be mangled into something that was more effective at extracting money. Naturally, I'm concerned that that is what's happening in EVE, that CCP is slowly and subtly trying to take pay for convenience to the next level. And while I'm not sure whether or not that is indeed going on, there does appear to be evidence supporting it. Oh, and by the way, I didn't just pick BDO out of a hat in order to provide an example of monetization go wrong. It's the flagship MMO of the company that just bought CCP last September. Moreover, CCP has been making design decisions that have been resulting in the rise of in-game prices for Plex, NPTCs, and skill extractors, which are all items that can be purchased for cash. So, let's take a look at the evidence. Honestly, we don't have a body yet. EVE has not yet been murdered, but that doesn't mean that no one's trying to kill it. So, let's look at the possible means, motive, and opportunity. First, the prices of Plex, NPTCs, and skill extractors and injectors, otherwise known as pilot service items, have clearly been skyrocketing. Well, I'm just a simple hyper chicken from a backwoods asteroid, but I would reckon that the more expensive these items were in-game, the more incentivized people would be to buy them for cash, either to use for themselves or to sell for S through the in-game market. In short, mechanics that inflate the prices of pilot service items probably increase CCP's revenue. But unlike in crime procedurals, I'm not going to assume that financial incentive in and of itself would be enough to constitute motive. After all, just because some devs and publishers are willing to destroy the core experiences of their games in pursuit of money, that doesn't mean that they all are. Well, quite honestly, if CCP was still independent, I wouldn't be making this video. I would chalk it all up to can't code properly asshattery. After all, I'm pretty sure I've read more than one post angrily exclaiming, "Okay, let me explain to you how your game works." Unfortunately, however, CCP is no longer independent. They've been acquired by a company that is infamous for implementing ludicrously grindy and frustrating mechanics that encourage microtransactions, which they call pay for convenience. Moreover, they have a history of broken promises concerning monetization. Now, I'm not a business expert, so if you are, feel free to chime in. But from what I understand, Prolobis bought and owns CCP. Now, the way they structured the deal is that CCP is an independent subsidiary, which means that they maintain their corporate structure and some degree of autonomy. However, at the end of the day, independent subsidiary is not the same thing as independent, and that gives Prolobis a lot of influence over what happens at CCP. Thus, even if we do believe that Hilmar and crew don't want to compromise their work, it wouldn't matter because they still have to answer to PA. And those guys probably aren't as protective of EVE as the guys who made it, have an MO of anti-consumer monetization methods, a history of broken promises concerning monetization, and a $440 million investment to recoup. In short, PA has motive, and it's in their character to do so. There's been quite a backlash in the gaming community recently towards loot boxes, pre-order bonuses, game-breaking bugs, unfinished products, false advertising, broken promises, pre-release review blackouts, and so on ad infinitum. Gamers are getting pissed, and it's affecting profits and business decisions, which we can see from things like the Fallout 76 review bomb and Activision breaking its partnership with Bungie. Moreover, PA themselves have experienced a mass player exodus when it went from a buy-to-play to a pay-for-convenience monetization model for the US release of BDO. And CCP has experienced their own player backlash with their overly priced cosmetics back in 2011, which seems kind of silly in retrospect. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I would certainly trade a $70 monocle for an independent CCP right about now. If EVE was to overtly and suddenly become BDO, the player base would throw a fit, and I'm pretty sure that CCP and PA know that. I mean, I don't think it's controversial to assert that EVE players are passionate, hardcore, and irascible, and if they can get so upset over cosmetics, it's pretty safe to assume that they would go thermo-fucking-nuclear over a compromise to the core experience of the game. So, if you were CCP and Pearl Abyss, how would you go about incentivizing microtransactions? Well, the popular fable asserts that if you put a frog into boiling water, it'll just jump out. The trick is to put them in cool water and then slowly raise the temperature. The frog won't notice and will stay put. Right now, we don't have clear and irrefutable evidence of a quick and overt strategy to corrupt the core experience. However, the evidence that we do have is probably what we would expect to see if CCP and PA were trying to do it gradually and subtly. CCP has been introducing mechanics that raise or prop up the prices of pilot services items, and their costs have reached historic highs. Now, I can't say for certain that that was the intent behind those mechanics, but that has been their effect. So, let's take a closer look at the mechanics and their ramifications. Okay, I've already discussed the absolute injection augmenter in depth in another video. Check it out through the link down below if you want my whole spiel. But for those that don't, the augmenter was a Christmas gift that allowed characters to use up to 3 skill injectors without suffering from any skill injector penalties, and it could be used every 18 to 36 hours depending on the biology skill. Once again, I go into more depth as to why I think this item is a mistake in my other video, but in short, skill injectors are supposed to work more as a tool to help new players catch up than to help older players pull ahead. And it's absolutely critical to recruitment and new player retention that new bros believe that they can catch up to the vets and be competitive. They aren't going to play a PvP-centric game if they feel like the deck is stacked against them and that the bar for competitiveness is forever receding into the distance. Putting my recent concerns aside, I think that several mechanics synergize to do a remarkable job of making it possible for new bros to be competitive. But that is an assertion I'll elaborate on in another video. For now, I want to point out that the absolute injection augmenter puts a thumb on the scale for older players and could possibly lead to reduced recruitment and player retention. And on top of all of that, I'm beginning to suspect that CCP were probably aware of the possible ramifications and released the item anyway because they were intentionally trying to drive up the prices of player services items in order to encourage real money purchases of them. So let's think about it. For those that don't know, the IS distribution curve is the inverse of the skill point distribution curve. Thus, it doesn't matter that characters with less than 80 million SP make up 80% of all characters. Aside from alts, they're eating space ramen and rinsing out condoms. In fact, the bottom 80% of players only possess 10% of the liquid Iscaneve. So, say that you do want to drive up the prices of pilot service items in order to incentivize cash purchases. Restricting supply isn't an option, so you have to increase demand. Now, an item that benefits everyone equally would probably move things in the right direction, but it's almost not worth the effort. I mean, the bottom 80% will barely move the needle. Hell, a lot of younger players can't even afford a single large skill injector. No, if you really want to see a demand spike, you need to target the oldest and wealthiest players. You need to design an item that provides an exponentially bigger benefit to players based on how much SP they have. After all, the more SP that they have, the more IS they are likely to have, and the more likely that they are going to be invested in the game and their characters. These are the guys that are willing to invest large sums of ISK into their characters. They will move money around, carry a rat until their asses hurt, and grind their way to the top of the incursion contribution list. They are wealthy, they are capable, and they are motivated. So, how do you design such an item? Maybe it's a coincidence, but it's like this item was custom made for our hypothetical question. There's just no way that they thought it would equally benefit all players, or help new players catch up, or preserve game balance, or anything else like that. In fact, it undermines the very reason why CCP implemented skill injector penalties in the first place. To hear the Talking and Station guys talk about it, they make it sound like it was all an innocent mistake. Like, someone at CCP put the wrong value for the cooldown timer, but then the money guys incidentally saw and were like, oh no, don't change it, we like it like that. And it's a nice narrative. I know I'd like to believe it, because it means that there's nothing sinister going on. It's like CCP is a mom and pop grocer, and Pop accidentally marked an Arizona iced tea for $1.59 before realizing that the price was on the can. But then Mom was like, no, don't peel off the sticker, go ahead and keep it at that price. But CCP is not a mom and pop grocer. It's a company worth damn near $500 million with 250 employees. And while they are certainly capable of making mistakes, I doubt they take a lackadaisical attitude towards things that can directly impact their bottom line. Moreover, out of all 3 mechanic changes I'm about to talk about, this one has far and away had the most obvious and profound effect on the prices of player service items. So, let's take a look at the graphs. Okay, I was initially going to cover these graphs in more depth, but it was long and boring, and I was doing a lot of speculation on things that I probably don't know enough about to speculate on. So, let's try and keep things short and sweet. Alright, Prices and sell volumes of large-scale injectors seem to have been profoundly impacted by the absolute injection augmenter. One thing I will mention specifically, however, is that Reddit found out about the AIA on December 3rd, but prices started rising on November 12th. It makes me think that the item first appeared on HoboLeaks on November the 12th, but I don't know. If anyone does, please leave a comment. Regardless, prices are at historic highs. Of course, CCP doesn't sell skill injectors. They sell the items required to make them. So let's go ahead and check those out. Recently, NPTCs have been behaving rather predictably. There would be a sale, prices would drop, slowly ramp up until another sale, and then the cycle would repeat. Lately, however, prices have not only been ramping up faster than normal, they are currently about 40% more than previous peaks. Plex prices were getting pretty low in the month before the Pearl Abyss still, but then started ramping up. Much like NPTCs, prices recently started trending upwards at a faster rate, and Plex is now at record highs. Before the Pearl Abyss deal, it cost about 1.35 bill to Plex your account. Currently, it costs about 1.8 bill. Now, to be fair, the overall price trend of Plex over long periods of time has always gone up. So the questions are whether or not this is going up faster than normal and whether or not it's intentional. Unfortunately, eMarket data has apparently shot the bed. It normally has price data going back much farther than eMarketer, but since it keeps giving me error messages, I'll have to go by eMarketer and memory. So, to the best of my recollection, Plex an account cost about 1 bill in 2015, and according to eMarketer, it cost 1.35 bill around late August 2018. This means that Plex prices rose about 33% over about a 3-year period. However, it now costs 1.8 bill to Plex your account. That basically means that we've seen 3 years worth of Plex price inflation over the past 6 months. Moreover, that upward trend started right before the Pearl Abyss deal had been announced. And here we can see that skill extractor prices have been trending upwards, that they're at historic highs, and that they seem to have been increasing in price faster as of late. Of course, everything I've learned about business and economics, I've learned through or because of doing Industry and Eve. Like, seriously, my qualifications are basically that I've watched Crash Course Economics. So, I'm probably not the most qualified expert to be talking on these matters. Regardless of my lack of qualifications and expertise, we can see that prices for Plex, NPTCs, and skill extractors have all been trending upwards since a little before the Pearl Abyss deal, and that they are currently at record highs. And I may not be able to say for certain that the absolute injection augmenter was designed to drive up the prices of pilot services items, but it certainly appears to have done just that. Alright, if you haven't heard about it by now, players are pissed at the new event reward structure. Instead of just dropping the rewards, you get tickets which you have to trade in. But you also have to trade in ISK and chromodynamic tricarboxyls. So there's this idea in psychology that people hate loss more than they like equivalently sized gains. It's called loss aversion, and I'm sure that there are YouTube videos on the subject if you want to know more. Regardless, players aren't particularly happy about having to sacrifice stuff in order to get literal garbage. But I'm not here to talk about why players hate the mechanic, but why CCP made it. So I started thinking about it, and I figured that CCP was trying to set up an ISK sink. And yes, that may affect Plex purchases, but it's definitely something that's good for players as well. So we should probably give them the benefit of the doubt here. But then I asked, why were the chromodynamic tricarboxyls required? Were they trying to set up a sink for that too? And that's when I was like, holy shit. Is the whole point of having to manufacture accelerators is to discourage their use. Now, I know this is some serious tinfoil hattery, but hear me out. So, generally speaking, event accelerators offer an incredible value to players. Of course, injectors do offer instantaneous and unallocated SP, but accelerators often have the better ISK per SP ratio. Moreover, as players move up the penalty brackets, accelerators become better and better values, skill injectors become worse and worse values, and players become richer, more hardcore, and more invested in their characters. In other words, accelerators incentivize players with more SP and more money to spend ISK on them instead of injectors. Of course, there's a problem with that. The problem is that CCP hasn't monetized accelerators, they monetize injectors. Now, trying to jack up accelerator prices so high that they become bad even for those in the top penalty bracket isn't going to be easy. especially if they're trying to drive up the prices of injectors as well. But it's not hard at all to design events to make it so accelerators are a bad deal for the players in the lower penalty brackets. In my graph, I made the cheapest price 7 mil because that's the cheapest I can remember standard plus 10 cerebral accelerators ever being. And I made the top price 175 mil because the recruitment reward accelerators are the most expensive accelerators I've ever seen, and they usually run about that price. Oh, and I colored the bars the way that I did for easy comparison. Anyway, if a standard accelerator hits about 75 mil, it starts becoming more beneficial for a player with less than 5 million SP to spend his ISK on large scale injectors. And if he's an alpha, daily alpha injectors, which can be bought for cash, are definitely a better deal. Next, the green bar demonstrates that it's better for players between 5 and 50 million SP to go with skill injectors when accelerators hit 100 mil. And it's 125 mil for those in the 40% penalty bracket. Oh, and this is all based off of the large scale injector's current selling price, which is a whopping 890 mil. So they have a horrible IS to SP ratio right now. And in case you're wondering, standard accelerators are currently selling for 185 mil right now in JITA. They are more expensive right now than event accelerators have ever been. Hell, the basic accelerators are selling for 87 mil. And this is 3 days into the event, so prices should have more or less stabilized. So yeah, it's certainly possible for accelerators to be so expensive that they're a bad deal for players. Moreover, CCP hasn't just been making design decisions that have been driving up their prices, they've seemingly been trying to make it harder and harder for players to get their hands on them. I can't remember if it was someone from CCP who said it, or if it was a player speculating, but I heard somewhere someone say that they introduced mining into the events in order to make them more inclusive. Yeah, well, not only do I think that's BS because they haven't been being very inclusive in new bros, but I also think that the changes have had an obvious and profound effect on accelerator prices. So let's take a deeper dive. Unfortunately, I can't find hard data on the accelerator prices from previous events, so I had to go by memory. And sorry for all the text on screen. Hopefully color coding it makes it easier to digest. I also started with the Federation Grand Prix because that's how far back I could reliably remember. Okay, let's get started. Alright, it would be unfair of me not to point out that accelerators have hit high prices before the Pearl Abyss deal. For example, accelerators were only available as an agency reward during the Federation Grand Prix, which increased their rarity and price. However, it wouldn't be controversial to assert that the norm was for fully built accelerators to drop at really good rates. As a result, they tended to be cheap, easy to obtain through the event or market, and abundant. I mean, players used to literally give these things away. Anyway, things appear to continue as normal with the first event after the Pearl Abyss deal. However, CCP decides to introduce mining with the Crimson Harvest 2018. Suddenly, after years of fully built accelerators being rewarded, blueprints now drop. They require various materials, but the bulk of their production cost comes from a new type of mineral called chromodynamic tricarboxyls. For the first event, asteroids containing it are plentiful and we get a good reprocessing rate, but CTs still account for approximately 72% of the cost of the accelerator. Anyway, the event gets plenty of negative feedback, but to be fair, a lot of that was due to a loot table issue that is irrelevant to our discussion. Next, Operation Permafrost introduces mechanics that make accelerators even more expensive. In fact, we need to go through it all because it's like they're trying to jack up the prices of accelerators. Oh, and I think the reason they're trying to jack up the prices instead of just removing them from the game is because they're afraid people might catch on to what's going on. But I digress. So first up, they put in an AoE cloud that killed mining ventures as they warped into the site. Let me repeat that. They put in an environmental effect that randomly killed moderately tanked newbie mining ships as they came out of warp. Now, that doesn't exactly sound like a very inclusive mechanic for a dev team that is purportedly trying to be inclusive. Next, they also restricted sites to one persistent site per constellation, which was supposedly done to encourage PvP. Now, it's possible that CCP thinks that player behavior is no more complex than that of a chicken's, and that if they cram enough of us into a tight enough space, we'll all fight. But It's also possible that they weren't actually concerned with PvP at all, and that they were just trying to further limit accelerator supply by making players fight over fewer drops. Think about it. Their big plan for encouraging PvP didn't bother to address the biggest reason not to fight while PvEing, nor did it provide any sort of incentive. And yeah, I realize that latter point sounds weird considering we're talking about EVE, but bear with me. So, PvE fit ships forego PvP effectiveness in order to run PvE content safely and quickly. Noobs and emotional players can sometimes be provoked into stupid decisions, but the average player knows better than to engage in PvP when PvE fit. So, when they do encounter emergent PvP opportunities while care bearing it up, they either ignore it or avoid it. So, how do you address that issue? Well, how about make the optimal fit for the site viable in PvP? Design the main loot drop to have excellent range control when not webbed or scrammed, and to warp off when it hits like 10% shields or armor, depending on how it's tanked. PvEers would then need to fit range control and warp disruption modules, which are the two most common and most critical differences between PvE and PvP fits. Anyway, having PvEers have to fit for PvP in order to run the content means that it's no longer suicide for them to engage in PvP. In other words, you've just removed the biggest reason why mogwais such as myself would abstain from PvP while PvEing. Second, I would provide, an actual incentive to fight. I mean, how is a couple extra agency points going to do the trick? Anyway, fighting over the main loot drop will likely provide some incentive, but you can also get that stuff without fighting or just buy it off of the market, so players could still opt out and get what they want. So I was thinking, if you really wanted to get a lot of players hyped, I would design some badass, non-transferable skins that can only be earned through killing other players in event sites. And I would make them actually look good and not like a Christmas elf jizzed on it. Yeah, and I guess you could use some sort of parallel agency reward tree with its own task and rewards for killing other players. Now that I presented how I would go about trying to encourage fights and live events, I ask you, do you think CCP was trying to encourage fights, or do you think that they were trying to decrease the supply of accelerator BPCs? Of course, I haven't seen the metrics, but I doubt an exceptional amount of fighting went on. I do, however, know for a fact that the accelerators were a lot more expensive than they usually were. And we're still not finished because we still have more on top of that. First, mining resources didn't respawn, which limited supply and screwed over later time zones. Second, there was an agency task which required reprocessing chromodynamic tricarboxyls in in-site structures. However, the structures were 98% less efficient than the stations were, and they didn't warn players with what their reprocessing rates were. The rate was so bad, you were basically throwing CTs away in exchange for a few agency points. It was like they designed a CT sink based off of trickery rather than an appropriate incentive. And then, on top of all of that, you couldn't search for accelerator blueprint contracts until the moment they expired. That's right, CCP implemented the fix during downtime immediately following their expiration. Look, do I have to keep going? Yes, I suppose it's possible that this stuff has been due to things like bugs, oversight, and bad design decisions, but at what point do you say that this is just way too much stuff just to be coincidence? When does it become a trend? What does CCP have to do before we say, okay, yes, they are definitely trying to manipulate the value of accelerators? For Christ's sakes, standard accelerators are currently selling for 185 million ISK. Maybe CCP is helmed by drooling idiots. The devs are phoning it in, and the live team is out on the lawn banging their heads together. Or maybe they do have some measure of competency. Maybe what we've been seeing can't all be chalked up to coincidence and or stupidity. With the current gaming climate and both companies having had experience dealing with player backlashes, is it really unreasonable to assume that multi-million-dollar international corporations might try to introduce mechanics designed to encourage microtransactions with a little bit more subtlety and grace than they have done in the past? Yeah, I know CCP has made assurances that everything is going to be okay, but they would say that whether it was true or not. I mean, when was the last time you heard a company come out and say something like, hey, we screwed the pooch, Now our creditors have sent a money guy in. He doesn't care about the core experience of the game or customers, brand loyalty, community goodwill, or any of that sort. His only job is to recover as much money for our creditors as humanly possible. So, we're really sorry, but you guys are going to hate what we have in the pipeline. Oh yeah, don't forget to keep spending money. I understand that CCP is a business and that EVE needs to be profitable. Thus, some compromise has to be made. But they already appear to be taking it too far. The feedback for the live events has grown overwhelmingly negative and the defenders have dried up. Currently, people seem to be chalking it up to CCP not knowing what they're doing, but I'm not so sure about that. CCP may very well know exactly what they are doing, which is making the game worse in order to make more money. They seem to be sabotaging live events and sacrificing perceptions of fairness in the pursuit of short-term profits. EVE has a varied player base with different interests and preferences, but in this case, I will presume to speak for the player base as a whole. We want the best possible version of EVE, and we hope that CCP's plan for financial success includes trying to deliver on that dream and not on destroying what they managed to achieve just to increase short-term profits.